Hello, thank you for stopping by. This is just going to be a brief, well, brief isn't really probably going to be the right word when I'm done with this video, but this is just going to be a user guide on how to use Hytide, the Hightail plugin. So I'll go over this briefly, just for those that may not know. To actually get the mod into your mods folder, you're going to want to open up your app data file, which you can do by, if you're on Windows, you can do by pressing Windows and then R, and then type in %appdata%. That'll open up this folder. You're going to want to find Hightail in here, go into user data, and then mods. And you're just going to want to paste the server jar, just this file, this Hytide file, the one you'll find on CurseForge, into this folder. And then once you've done that, you can create a new world. I'm going to make a creative world just for demonstration purposes. In the settings, you're going to want to go to mods. You should see Hytide in here. You may have to start your game to get this to show up. You just take this to enabled, and that should be about it. You can create your world, and you will have Hytide enabled. So the first most important thing to know is the hytide-help command. It's just simply hytide-help. This will give you a list of every command that you can use to develop with this mod. The most important thing that you want to, or one of the most important things I should say, that you'll want to know very well how to use are triggers. Triggers are how you actually like section off parts of your map into being separated from each other so that enemies aren't spawning from the entire map at once. Unless, of course, you want them to spawn, in which case you would have less of a need for triggers. Want them to spawn from all parts of the map at once. So the first thing we're going to look at is the create trigger zone command. And so if you want a detailed explanation of how to actually use the commands, you can do hytide-help, and then add the optional parameter of command, and then just put in the name of the command you want to learn about. So that would be create trigger zone. And then this gives you the actual use case for the command. So for this one, it would be /create trigger zone. You can put in whatever name you want. So for this, I'll just do checkpoint zone 1, because I know that this one is going to be a checkpoint. And then you can put in group number. So important thing to know here, group numbers are very important between triggers and spawn points. So the first type of checkpoint I'm going to be making here is the first type of trigger I'm going to be making here is a checkpoint. Checkpoints will set your active group number, and each player has their own active group number. So when you walk into a new checkpoint, it will set your group number to whatever the group number of the checkpoint is, and then that group number will be used to determine what spawn points are used to spawn from. That way you don't have enemies spawning at every point in the map, and you can kind of section off the map to where enemies are spawning, in front of the player or at certain points around the player, etc., etc. So for this, I'm just going to set the group number to 1. I'll set the radius to 2. The radius is just, the radius of the sphere, because triggers are always spheres in this. And then the type will be checkpoint. But before I create this, I'm going to put this right here, just so it's easier to remember where it is, because there isn't any kind of visual for it, because you wouldn't want the visual distracting you. But if I do another command, which you'll probably be using semi-frequently for debugging purposes, you can do /toggle-debug. This will start showing logs for the timers, the horde and special timers. It'll show logs for unstucking NPCs. There's a system for getting rid of NPCs that are stuck somewhere so they don't take up spawn slots. But for this, I'm just going to enter this and then toggle it off so that way it stops spitting out these logs. And you can see up here, we have now entered checkpoint zone 1, and our active group has been set to 1. So now what we can do with that is actually create some spawn points. So the most important, or the most impactful things that checkpoints affect are going to be horde and special spawns, which for this one, I will set this to a horde spawn. So I'll show you how to make a spawn location. So again, we'll do hytide-help, optional parameter of command equals create spawn, which you can find all the different commands again with the hytide-help command. This one would be this command, create spawn, and then I can see how to actually use it. So it'd be /create spawn. The ID we'll just do horde 1 entity type. Not going to set that because if you leave that blank, then it will just random the background like spawn director that this mod includes will just randomly select enemies. And so it's ideal to leave this blank, but if you for some reason want a specific enemy type spawning, then you can't set that. Spawn number, we're going to set to 25, that's a decent amount. Group number needs to be 1 because our active group is 1, remember. Group number is important because that determines what spawn points are actually active, depending on what checkpoint. You know, the checkpoint sets your active group, and then depending on what your active group is, spawn points will be triggered based off that. And then role, it should list all the roles here. Yeah, so this one we're going to set it to horde because this is a horde spawn point. Not horde. I don't need to set identifier or path name for horde or special spawn points, or ambient. But for boss spawn points, you will want the identifier, and I'll get into this later, but I'm just saying this now. For boss spawn points, you will want the identifier, and for patrol spawn points, you'll want both the identifier and the path name if you want the patrol to follow a path. If you just want the patrol to be stationary, then you won't include the path name. So we can create this. So now there is a horde spawn point here. And if we toggle debug again, we'll see we are 30-ish seconds away from another horde spawning, so we'll just wait on that. In the meantime, we can come over here and create a special spawn point, and we can do that by just simply changing a little bit of this around. Name it special 1. We'll just spawn 1 enemy from it. Again, group 1. You know, 1 enemy, group 1, type of special. And that is all we need. And so now, yep, we'll see our horde spawn from this. Nice number of enemies, decent blend of things. There's 1 big elite, a few smaller enemies, and a bunch of rats, of course. And here in about 10 seconds, we'll see stuff spawn from the special thing. So I'm just going to wait for special to spawn. There's our 1 special, our archer. Alrighty, next. Ooh, okay, I can show the reset command here. Also, you can see another wave of spawns hit. There's another elite, and then another 17 seconds, the last horde wave would spawn, and then there'd be a cooldown between hordes. But I'm not going to wait for that because you've seen how it works. Now I can do /reset, which actually I'm going to do /hytide-help. Command equals reset. And I'm also going to toggle debug so it stops spitting that out. And you can see resetting will clear all of these NPCs. It will reset the states of any blocks that have been changed by events. It will teleport players back to the spawn location. It will reset your active group. It will reset the active group of all players to 0. So remember, entering checkpoints will set your active group to a certain number, and then resetting will set it back to 0. It'll stop any events that are running. It will respawn any items, it will re-trigger any item spawn locations, and then we'll randomize what boss and patrols are active. So let's just do /reset. All the enemies are gone, you're set back to here, and just as an example, because horde and special spawn locations depend on your checkpoint number, if I go into this command, which I can show up, where is my hytide-help? It probably got pushed off the top here and isn't visible anymore. I can just type it back in. hytide-help. If I use the /trigger, where is it? /trigger spawn command. Spawn. Oh, again, I should be using hytide-help command trigger spawn, so you can actually see how to use it. It's a pretty simple command. It's just /trigger spawn, and you just type in the group number of the spawn you want to trigger, and then the role. So whether it's a horde or special spawn point, you need to include that there. So for this, I can show you that if I don't enter this checkpoint and set my active group to the same active group as this spawn point, then I can't, nothing will spawn here. So if I try and spawn things from from the group, let me rephrase. If I try and spawn things from a spawn point that is labeled as group 1, but my active group is still 0 because I reset, then nothing will spawn. Which you can see, cannot spawn groups, your active group is 0, enter the correct trigger zone first. Yep. But if I come over here, enter this checkpoint, and then do that, it spawns just fine. So let's reset again, clear all that, and I can get into the next type of trigger, which is the ambient trigger, which similarly is tied to ambient spawn points. So ambient spawns will be it's kind of in the name. They will be all the ambient spawns that are just around the map as you're walking around. They don't rely on any timers or anything. They'll just be enemies you'll encounter as you're, working your way through a map or around a map. So like with hordes and specials, those will always spawn on timers, so they're kind of inconsistent, because sometimes you'll be fighting hordes and then you'll have times between where you can progress through the map and then another horde will hit or another special spawn will hit, and make you, fight those encounters. But ambient spawns will be much more consistent, because these are things that are just you're always pushing through. The difference is that ambient spawns only trigger once when you enter the trigger, the ambient trigger, meaning they do not respawn. So if I do /create trigger zone, so I'm actually gonna go up here just so I can remember how it's formatted. Create trigger zone. I'm going to name this to ambient zone 1. Group number will be again 1. Radius 2, and then I need to set the type to ambient. So there should be an ambient trigger there. I can come over here and then set, I can go up to create spawn, change this to be named ambient, let's make that 5 enemies from there. Or actually, let me go up and look at this, wherever it is. Might have gotten pushed off also. Yeah, I think it did. I'm just going to use my hytide-help. Hytide-help command equals create spawn. I just needed to remember if it was... Okay, it is spawn number first and then group number. That's what I was forgetting. So now I can go back into this. Name this to ambient. So spawn number first, 5 enemies, group number 1. And then of course type ambient. And so now we have our spawn point, our ambient spawn point right here, our ambient trigger there, which I have already hit this because I was inside it when it was created. So if I just reset, that should be reset and can be hit again. One difference between checkpoints and ambient spawns is that ambient spawns do not check your active group when spawning enemies. They only spawn enemies based off of the group number that was put into the actual ambient trigger zone. So like for this trigger zone, I set its group number to 1, so it's going to trigger all group number 1 ambient spawn points, regardless of your active group numbers. Like even though I just reset and my active group is still 0, if I hit this, enemies will spawn there. And just as a demonstration, if I just add another, these little spots are just indicators for where the things are. These don't actually do anything. The slate brick spots. If I come here and I create another one, but I'll just name this ambient 2, so it's the exact same kind of spawn point, same group number, same amount of enemies, ambient spawn point. I can just do that nice and easy. And now if I reset and hit this, stuff spawns from both of them. It's that easy. Alrighty, now we're getting into the meat of it. Boss spawn points. So this is where it gets a little more complicated in terms of keeping things structured and formatted. Or not really formatted, but just in terms of, keeping track of what triggers lead to where and such. But creating the trigger is, same as you've done before. So just go up here, trigger zone. I'll name this boss zone 1, group number 1, radius 2, and of course the type will be boss. But because this is a boss spawn point, remember I said earlier, this needs an identifier. Which all the identifier is just some name you can give it, because one boss trigger point ties to exactly one boss spawn point. So this trigger zone, which I'm about to make, I'll just name it first boss. That'll create that. Then whenever I make a boss spawn point, exactly one boss spawn point will have the same identifier as this, which links the two together. So now if I come over here and we look up into our create spawn thing, we can see it also has an identifier here. And what this will do, what we can do here is we can create a spawn that's named boss1. It'll spawn one boss at group number 1. Its type is boss, and its identifier is going to be the same first boss. And so now that you have your boss spawn point with the identifier of first boss, and your boss trigger with the identifier of first boss, meaning that they are linked together, you can simply walk into the trigger, and that will spawn your boss. Alrighty. Last but not least, we have patrol. So patrols will be a large group of elite enemies, specifically. They're supposed to be encounters that are kind of similar to boss encounters, meaning that they're difficult and, supposed to be deadly, but the difference is that the player can avoid patrols, because patrols can be set to follow specific paths, and if the player doesn't get too close to them, then they will not aggress the player. One thing to note is that boss and patrols are linked pretty tightly, in that per checkpoint, only one boss or patrol trigger will be set to be active at once. And now what this means is that if I were to make a patrol trigger right here with the same group of 1 as the checkpoint back there, or just the same group as this boss trigger, I should specify, then only one of these would be picked as being active. The other one would be inactive, meaning that for that area, only one boss or patrol can exist. So like if you have a checkpoint leading into a big, a long hallway or a room or something, only one boss or patrol will be picked to be active in that area. All the rest will be deactivated. This gives a way for, where the encounter of, the boss or patrol or whatever in that area is found is slightly different each run. That way it spices up the game just a little bit. Spices up the enemy spawning just a little bit. So let's get into how to actually make a patrol spawn point. So it's very similar to the others. You are just going to take your trigger zone. I'm going to rename it to Patrol Zone 1. Group of 1, radius of 2. Set the type to Patrol. And then I'm going to set the identifier to first Patrol. And then you can just simply create that. So, let me pull up the hytide-help entry for the creating spawn, because there's one unique thing with patrols, and that is obviously the path that they can follow. So this path name, optional parameter. So how you actually make a path, that was a cool animation. How you actually make a path for a patrol is just with the game's built-in path creator. So if you go and do commands, you type in path, there will be this command here. All you're going to want to do is go to new, and then just set your path name to whatever. For me, I'm just also going to set it to first pat, sure. You just create that, and that will automatically set the first node of the patrol, or of the path, sorry, to where you started it, to where you're standing. Then you're just going to walk over to wherever you want the next node, and the way that nodes work is the patrol will just follow in a, pretty straight line wherever you set the nodes. So like if the first node is there, and I set the next node to be here, which you can do with simply just path.add, then the next node will be set here, and then do that again there, do that again there, and then connect it back up here. The patrol will just simply follow this path around, going from the start to node after node. And so then, now that the path actually exists, I can go back to my create spawn command, and I can do create spawn patrol 1. I'm going to spawn 20 enemies from this patrol. Group number 1, type of patrol, identifier first patrol, and then path name first pat. And then that makes that. And so now, as I said earlier, whenever you reset, the game will randomly choose between each of these. So it's kind of a like there it chose that, meaning the patrol won't spawn if I enter this trigger. But this boss did spawn. So if I reset again, we're just going to gamble here for a bit until it gives us the patrol. And I can show you that. See, boss didn't spawn that time, patrol does spawn this time. They're kind of very stacked on top of each other, but yeah. You can see they'll just work their way around this, following that path exactly as you've set it. And that's how you can set patrols for enemies. So, now you know how to make checkpoints, and you know how checkpoints affect horde and special spawns. You know how to make ambient spawn points, and know where that'll spawn your ambients. You know how to set boss spawns, and know how one boss trigger affects one boss spawn, and similarly, one patrol trigger affects one patrol spawn, and how patrols can be set to follow specific paths. So, that's pretty much everything there is for the actual spawning of enemies, and you can create entire maps using these structures. You can have your horde spawns and your special spawns, adding intense moments. Similarly, your boss and patrols for, specific encounters, and then the ambience for just pacing the general flow and how many enemies there just are in your way through a map. So that was pretty much everything to do with these three commands, also trigger spawn. I didn't go over delete spawn or list spawns. Delete spawn is just you put in the ID of the spawn marker, and that will remove it from, from the project. List spawns just list out all of the active spawn markers and their names. And then trigger zones has the same two kind of things. You can delete trigger zones by name or by ID, and then you can list all the trigger zones and their IDs and all their information. Events are going to be the next most important thing, which is how you can actually add cool specific encounters to your maps. So again, let's start with the hytide-help command to start with create event. Command create event. Commands are a little complicated, but I'll do my best to explain them. So primarily, events are composed of a couple different things. First is their in condition. First is their trigger condition, which is what actually prompts the event to start. Next is their end condition, which is what prompts the event to end. And then there's everything in between, which everything in between is just what you set the horde timers to be and what you set the special timers to be. Because events let you customize the actual enemy spawning structure, or enemy spawning timers, I should say, of hordes and specials. As well as, and the other, honestly more important thing that events can do is trigger sub-events, which sub-events are another thing I'll have to open in hytide-help. Command equals add sub-event. And remember, you can find this command right here. Add sub-event. Sub-events are things that will be triggered in the middle of an existing event, like through the duration of an existing event, and will perform certain actions for you. So for example, if I added a sub-event on a timer, so let's say 5 seconds after the event is triggered, it will add some blocks somewhere, right? That's a very simple example. But you can also do things like removing blocks, which I'll demonstrate. You can spawn certain NPCs. You can set blocks to certain states, like you can set doors to open. And I'm just going to show you some examples of some of this stuff. So, let's create an event. And events don't have locations. You can do this from anywhere. I don't know why I'm doing that. / create event. I'm going to scroll up to our create event. First you set the ID. I'm just going to call this event 1. Set the end condition. End condition, I'll just set it to timer because that's the simplest for now. There are other end conditions you can do, like when a certain amount of entities are killed, whenever a specific trigger is hit or entered, when a block is broken, or when blocks are interacted with, etc., etc. For horde timers, I'll set it to 10 seconds, because again, this is in milliseconds, so 10,000 milliseconds is 10 seconds. Same with the max timer. The horde timers set randomly pick between two different numbers. The default is 2 and 3 minutes it picks between, but for this, I'm just setting it to between the same number, so it's the same number, so there's no variation. For horde wave interval, I'll set that to 20 seconds. The default is 30, by the way. Horde wave count, I'll leave it at 3. 3 is also the default. Special timer, we'll set this to 25 seconds. And then these are optional parameters, but you're pretty much always going to want to include them. Is going to be the end condition value, which is going to be one of these, or sorry, it's going to be one of these in the optionals. So for this, it would be since our end condition was timer, remember back here we set our end condition to timer. We're going to want to set the end condition value to be some amount of time later that the event will end. Yeah, 60 seconds. And you will have to remember your horde timers and special timers, maybe not your special timers, but your horde timers especially, because how many of these waves actually trigger depends on how much time you're actually given. It's like if you do the math here, the horde will take 10 seconds for the first wave to spawn, and then 20 seconds between 3 waves is 60, or it's 20 times 3 plus 10, which is 70 seconds total, meaning in 60 seconds, not all of the horde would have spawned, which isn't going to cause any problem. It's not going to like cause a crash or anything, but it would just mean that one of your, horde waves didn't spawn, and if you're intending 3 waves to spawn, then that can be, that can be a problem. So instead, I'm just going to set this to 71 seconds, so that all of those waves will spawn. And then, the trigger chords is the other important thing. What trigger chords is the default way that events are triggered is by interacting with any block, really. It could be any block that has an interaction prompt. So I'm going to copy this because I haven't actually set a block to be interacted with. Let's just say I use some random lighting block. And the way you can get the location of the block is pretty easy. You can just do F7, and then up in the top left corner, you can see in blue here, it tells you what block you're looking at, and then the location of that block. So because I'm looking at this candle, I can do trigger chords are 6, and the coordinates are separated by colons. So 6, 80, 31. And now, if I... Can that not actually be interacted with? Oh. Okay, bad block to pick. What about this? There we go. Okay. I picked the one lighting object that can't be interacted with there. But you can see when you interact with that block at that location, the event starts. And so this would be like, say your players enter a big arena or something, and there's a lever on a wall they have to press, and when they press that lever, a gate closes behind them or something, and then a bunch of enemies start spawning. That's how you can kind of set up events. Now that I can actually start the event, let's make the event actually do things. So, real quick, I'm just going to go step in here, or I'll reset later, so that didn't really matter. But one thing I'm going to do is make it remove these blocks, for example. So again, The way you're going to do that is with sub-events. So my add sub-event command is right here. What I can do is not that. I can do /add sub-event. I'll put in the event ID of the event that I want the sub-event tied to. So that was just event1 is what I named it. The sub-event ID, we'll again keep it simple, just sub-event1. Trigger type will have down here is where you can have the trigger type. So again, we can do, there's various trigger types for sub-events. You can do block interactions, whenever certain blocks, or wait, there's block interactions, whenever another sub-event completes, etc., etc. This might be the only ones, but anyways. For now, again, we're just going to do timer, because it's going to be the most common and easiest one to demonstrate with. Trigger type, we'll set the trigger data to 5 seconds. Yeah, we'll set it to 3 seconds. Doesn't really matter. And then the important part is going to be the action. So what is this sub-event actually going to do? For now, it's just going to be removing these blocks, right? So we'll just do remove blocks. And then the action data, which is going to be the coordinates of the blocks that I want removed. So for this, it's just going to be wherever I'm looking at. So 5, 80, 35. 80, 35. And then if you want to add multiple blocks to be removed, you'll just separate each block. So like this is the location of one block. I'll separate that with a semicolon. And then I can add the next block. I will at some point soon probably add a way that you can remove ranges of blocks. So like you can define 2 coordinates and then it'll remove all the blocks between those points. That way removing like larger like sections of walls or something is easier and you don't have to put in every block manually. But for now this is just what I have. So keep an eye out for that update. But then I'm just going to copy this so that I can move over. So it's 5, 6, 7. And then from 80 to 81. Cool. Not that. Copy paste. So it's just going to be this. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry if this looks a little messy, but just changing the coordinates of all the blocks ever so slightly. I'm actually going to then copy and paste all of this. And then just change the y coordinate of all these to 81. And then bang. That is our sub-event added, which should remove these blocks. The next sub-event, that was a lot of enemies. The next sub-event we're going to add is opening doors. So again, what we can do is come back here. We can take the same command, change its name to sub-event2, and then change its action type to set, where is it? Set block state. Set block state, there we go. And then the data will just be the coordinate of the block, so that in this case it would be this corner of this door. So the coordinate is 7, 80, 39. Sorry if it's hard to read up there because the color is kind of blending into the sky, but it does say 7, 80, 39 as this coordinate of the door. So 7, 80, 39, at, and then whatever like position you want the door in. So in this case, as for figuring out what the different block states are, again, using this F7 window to see the state of the door is really helpful, because whenever you, like if I opened this door, whenever you look up here, at the end of the name, it would say like underscore open door in or something like that, and that would be the state of that door. And so you can figure out the state that you need the door in by looking at that. But for me, I'm pretty sure it is just open door. It might be open door out to get it to swing outwards. If that's wrong, I can just change it, and it's just open door in is the only other variation. And there we go, that's our 2 sub-events added. Alrighty, so now that you've got your sub-events defined, all you gotta do is reset. Come over here, do this, and boom. Blocks break, door opens, and when you reset, all of that gets put back to the way it was before. Perfect. So now, you know how to create spawn points, you know how to make events, and so now, pretty much all that's left is knowing how to actually modify things yourself. So again, events, you had your create event, you can delete events if you want, that's just by the ID that you set. Sub-events, same thing, you can remove sub-events if you want. You can manually start and stop events, so you don't have to trigger them by like interacting with the block or whatever. And then list all the events. Spawn director, I'll just gloss over these. You can pause the horde timers, unpause the horde timer. Horde timer singular, sorry. You can restart it, that'll just make it, you know, pick a random number between whatever the 2 values are, the min and the max values are, and then start counting down again. Same with special timers, those are all the same. And then this is where you're going to want to go to actually modify things yourself, is the data files. So let's say that I do not like one of these triggers, for example. Say I want to change one of their properties or their name or something. And instead of going and deleting the thing, and then like remaking it entirely, I can just go into the data file, which you can find by typing show. For trigger zones, it would be show trigger zones data location. And that'll give you the file path for that. So for me, I know that it'll be in app data, hightail, it'll be in your user data and saves folder, and then into the world folder of whatever world you're in. The one I'm in is just named demo. Into mods, into group hytide, which is this mod's folder. And then you just gotta find the JSON file that you're looking for. So for me, I know it is the trigger zones file. If you want to change your events, you can change events, which this also contains your sub-events. You can change your spawn markers, your item spawn locations. You can change, and you can change entity roles. I'll go over entity roles here later, but for the most part, you're going to want to leave those alone. For now, let's just say I want to go into trigger zones, though. So this just opens it up into VS Code, and if you're familiar with JSON, it should be pretty easy to read. There's just your name, you know, the checkpoint, or the trigger name, sorry, the group number, the radius, its location in the world, what world it's associated with, and then what type it is. What world instance, I should say. So then, say I want to change this to, I don't know, have the group number of 2 or something. I can just go in here and change that instead of having to go and delete it. I'm going to leave it at 1 for now, though. And you can do the same with your spawn markers, which I already have open, and your events, which you can see the events, you know, your event ID, the coordinates of the block that triggers it, your sub-event, its name, its trigger type, its trigger data, and everything else that you'd want to know about the event and its sub-events. So there is one thing that I left out, and it's mostly just because it's simple and it doesn't really tie into the rest of this. But that is simply event spawns, which you can see right here. Or item spawns, sorry, not event spawns. Item spawns. So let's just add a few places where I can place some of item spawns. All you're going to do is do hytide. This is just learning how to use it as usual. Equals create item spawn. It's a simple command. It's just the item spawn and the name of the item spawn. So all I'm gonna do is just keep it simple. Do /create item spawn, and I'll name it item spawn 1. Same here. Same there. Moving through all these. And now I have 9 item spawns. And the items that will spawn are going to be, well, first I'll show you it working, and then I'll get into this next thing. Reset. And you can see, some of them have nothing, some of them have items. That's just kind of how it works. There's health potions, bombs, arrows, and I believe that's all the items I have in it right now. But yeah. So this gets me into the actual custom weapons and items that this mod contains. And NPCs, importantly. NPCs are a big one. So firstly, starting right here, this is the arrow that you see over there. So there's custom arrows, battle axes, bombs. I'm not going to get into how these work, I'll let you discover that yourself. And what I've changed about them. I won't get into that, but I'll just go over which ones are unique. So battle axe, bomb, crossbow, daggers, mace, shield, shortbow, and sword. Those are all the custom items that I've made. The custom weapons I've made, I should say. There's also, of course, the health potion. And I can get the rest by typing in this. And the door. Which, of course, the only difference with the door is you can't open it, obviously. It doesn't have an interact prompt, and that's just because it's supposed to be used with events. Because, you know, if you have an event where you're supposed to be locking someone into a room, you don't want the person just opening the door and leaving, right? You want them to wait until the event's over, and then the door will open itself. And then into, importantly, the entities. So here, all of the entities and items have this hytide underscore prefix. You can find them right here. So like here, there's a custom rat with its ambient version. I don't believe I used the grizzly anywhere, but it is here. I primarily use the polar bear in its versions. Crawler void, eye void. I'm not going to read through all these, but you can see there's quite a few. And these are all just used in the spawned, or used by the spawn director, I should say, to spawn from horde spawn locations, or special spawn locations, ambient spawn locations, boss spawn locations, and patrol spawns, right? All the way down through here. So those are all of the different types of entities that I've modified or changed in some way to be fit for this kind of a setting, right? And so if you want, let's say you want to add your own entities to be used by this mod, or you want to change the balancing or the density of certain enemies, that is where entity roles comes in. This entity roles.json file, which you can find in your group hytide folder. This is what defines a few things. So of course you have your horde. You have the different roles that enemies can spawn in. So you have your horde enemies are defined here. Your ambient enemies are defined here. Patrol, boss, and special down at the bottom. So within each of these categories, you have the different enemies that can spawn at those spawn locations. So like all enemies that can spawn from a horde spawn location are in this horde section. for example. So if you wanted to add new horde enemies, all you would have to do is comma, or better yet, just copy and paste one of these blocks. It's simpler. Not like that, like that. And then just change out this name with whatever enemy you want added, and then you can change the cap and the weight as you want. As for what the cap and weight actually do, the cap is how many enemies can be spawned in one wave of spawning. So like one horde wave or one special wave, or from one ambient enemy spawn point, or from one ambient spawn point, for example. That's what the cap controls. So if you only want, like for example, the polar bear, the polar bear is a pretty tanky and hefty enemy, a dangerous enemy. So I have it limited to only spawning one from, one in a horde at most. But if you wanted more, polar bears to have the chance to spawn, then you can increase that cap. And then lastly, the weight is going to be the chance that that specific enemy type has to spawn. And this is relative to each other. So again, sticking with the horde analogy, if you were to add together all of these numbers, then that would be the total pool, the total spawning probability pool, I should say. And then however much of that pool that each enemy type takes up is the chance that that enemy has to spawn. So doing some quick math, let's pull up a calculator. If we do 150 plus 40 plus 20 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2, I was just adding multiple of them together, we get 219. So that's the total spawning probability pool. And then if we do 150 divided by 219, we get about 68%. So that means that 68%, or roughly 68% of the enemies that spawn are going to be aggressive rats. Same with the rest of these. Each of them takes up a, less and less, as the enemies get more dangerous, they take up a smaller portion of that pie, and so you see proportionally less of them. So if you want to increase the rate that some specific enemy is spawning, you just increase the weight, for example. And that same trend, follows through with ambient spawns and boss spawns and patrol spawns. Like for example, with patrols, all of their weights are the same, so they're each going to have the same chance of spawning. Same with bosses. The only difference with bosses is that because all the golems are very similar, the only difference with the golems I've made is I've given them all a weight of 1, so that collectively all the golems have a weight of 5, if that makes sense. And yeah, I think that should be about everything. You should somewhat understand how groups work, how the checkpoints change your group, and how what active group you are determines what horde and special spawn locations are active. How ambient spawn locations trigger all of the same group number that is the same as the ambient spawn triggers group number. How boss triggers connect to one specific boss trigger with the identifier. How patrol triggers connect to one specific patrol by the identifier, and patrols can be set to have paths that they'll follow. How events can be made to do things like change the spawn rates and the spawn timers in events, or of the horde and special spawn points, and can also be made to do things like destroy blocks and open doors. And then you can set item spawns, as well as understanding how to get to the file locations if you want to change any of those specific things, and change entity roles if you want to add new entities, or modify weights and stuff. So, I hope this was a good enough explanation. Remember to use that hytide-help command. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me on CurseForge or in the comments of this video, especially, are the places I'm going to be looking. And I'd love to answer those questions for you. So, good luck using this. It's a pretty specific tool. It was primarily made with the goal of being able to remake Vermintide maps, which is, you know, if you're a Vermintide player, you'll find pretty evident by the other video I'm going to release of me playing through part of a map that I've been working on. But yeah, I hope you find this useful and can use it to make some cool horde-based things. So yeah, thank you for watching and hope you enjoy.